The desert wind carried more than just dust that night. It carried fear. By the time the sun slipped behind the red cliffs of Dust River, even the drunkest man in the saloon had sobered up. The clock above the church door pointed toward midnight, and everyone in town knew what that meant. The bell would ring, and when it did, someone was going to die. No one remembered exactly when it started, that curse of the midnight bell. Some said it began 13 years back, the night Sheriff Colton Hayes put a rope around a man's neck without a trial. Others whispered it began even earlier, when Dust River's soil turned red with the blood of innocents during the border wars. But one thing was certain. Every time that bell tolled at midnight, someone in Dust River paid for their sins. Sheriff Colton Hayes leaned against the rail outside his office, a cigar trembling between his fingers. He was a tall man, once full of pride, but age and whiskey had hollowed him out. His badge caught the last trace of moonlight, glinting like a guilty memory. He'd been waiting for this night. In the jail cell behind him sat a boy, no older than 20, with his hands bound and his face bruised. His name was Eli Mercer, son of the town's blacksmith. The boy had been caught trying to rob the stagecoach 3 nights ago. He claimed he didn't do it, but the evidence said otherwise. Colton hadn't believed him. Not because of the crime, but because the boy's last name carried the wrong kind of shadow. His father, Jacob Mercer, had been the man Colton had hanged 13 years ago, the very night the bell first rang. Across town, in the dim light of the saloon, Mara Finch poured whiskey into empty glasses that nobody touched. Her brown hair fell loose around her shoulders, her eyes heavy with memories. She'd once loved the sheriff years ago before his world turned bitter. She watched him now through the saloon window, wondering if the man she once knew was still in there somewhere. "You think he'll do it?" whispered Tom Avery, the piano player, his voice trembling. Mara didn't answer. She just looked toward the church tower where the bell hung, silent and heavy. "That bell don't ring on its own," she said softly. "Somebody's got to pull the rope." Midnight crept closer. A single lantern flickered in the sheriff's office, throwing long, dancing shadows across Colton's lined face. Eli sat on the cot, staring through the bars. "You gonna hang me too, Sheriff?" the boy asked quietly. Colton exhaled a slow, smoky breath. "That depends on what you did, son." "I didn't rob that coach," Eli said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "Someone planted that gold in my satchel. But I reckon you don't believe me. You never believed Denny Mercer was worth a damn." Colton froze. The boy's words cut deeper than he expected. He saw the ghost of Jacob Mercer in the boy's face, the same stubborn jaw, the same unwavering eyes, the man Colton had hanged without proof, driven by rage and rumor. "Go to sleep, son," the sheriff muttered, his voice rough. "We'll talk come morning." But Eli didn't sleep, and neither did Colton. At 11:59, the desert fell silent. Not even the coyotes dared to cry. Then came the sound, slow, heavy, echoing down from the church tower. Gong. The first toll froze the blood in every man's veins. Gong. Mara dropped the bottle in her hand, glass shattered like a gunshot. Gong. Colton's eyes shot up toward the steeple, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't ordered the bell to ring. No one had. He rushed into the street, his boots slamming against the hard-packed dirt, his revolver already drawn. The night air was cold, the moon pale and watchful. In every window, candlelight flickered as the townsfolk peered out in terror. Then Colton saw it. A figure in the church tower silhouetted against the moon. A man was standing there, his hand gripping the rope. The sheriff shouted, "Who's up there?" No answer came back, just the slow, echoing toll of that cursed bell. He took off running toward the church, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind him, the saloon doors burst open as Mara stepped into the street, her voice breaking. "Colton, don't go. It ain't worth it." But the sheriff didn't stop. He climbed the church steps, the old wood creaking under his boots. The bell still rang above him, steady, cruel, alive. When he reached the belfry, he froze. The rope swung gently in the breeze, but no one was there. There was only the sound of the wind and the fading echo of the bell. Colton turned, scanning the dark corners of the tower, and that's when he saw it. In the lantern's faint glow, carved deep and jagged into a wooden beam, was a single word: justice. Down below, Mara looked toward the sheriff's office and her blood ran cold. The jail door stood wide open. Eli Mercer was gone, and on the cot where he'd been sitting lay the sheriff's badge glinting in the lantern light. The dawn came slow to Dust River, pale and silent, as if it was afraid to wake the dead. Sheriff Colton Hayes sat in his office, his badge still missing, his thoughts heavier than the mountains themselves. The boy, Eli Mercer, had vanished without a single trace. The door creaked open and Mara Finch stepped inside, her dress still dusted from the long night. She looked at Colton the way a mother looks at a wounded child, full of pity and something that felt a lot like anger. "You found the boy yet?" she asked, her voice low. Colton just shook his head. Riders searched the riverbed and the canyon trail. Nothing. Not a single footprint after he left the jailhouse. Mara's eyes narrowed. Then whoever rang that bell, they took him. Colton's hand trembled as he poured coffee into a tin cup. "That bell's been silent for years, Mara. If it's ringing again, it means something foul is coming for this town. Maybe it's coming for me." She stepped closer, her voice steady and firm. "Colton, it already came for you." By noon, the news had spread through town like a wildfire. The preacher swore the church tower door had been locked from the inside. The blacksmith's widow claimed she saw a shadow riding out toward the canyon at dawn, a man dressed all in black, leading a horse with a second, empty saddle. Every rumor twisted a little tighter around Colton's heart. He couldn't just sit there. He saddled up his old Mustang, Dusty, and rode out alone. The desert stretched wide and silent, shimmering with heat. He followed the dry riverbed toward the hills, where the rocks rose up like broken teeth against the skyline. About half a mile out, he saw something glinting, caught on a mesquite bush. It was a strip of rope, the same kind he used back in his jail. It was fresh, torn. Then, just beyond the next ridge, he saw it, a thin curl of smoke rising into the sky. Colton spurred Dusty on, his horse panting hard beneath him. He reached the old Mercer cabin, a place that had been abandoned for over a decade. The windows were shattered, the door hanging by a single hinge. Smoke rose from a campfire out front, and beside it, a lone figure sat, sharpening a knife. "Eli!" Colton called out, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver. The boy looked up. His face was tired, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "You finally came." Colton dismounted slowly. "The whole town's looking for you, son. You just made it worse by running." Eli let out a bitter little smirk. "Didn't run. Just came home, same as you." The words hit Colton deep. This was the place where he'd once hanged Jacob Mercer, Eli's father, right outside this very cabin, under the twisted oak that still stood there like a ghost. "Tell me who helped you escape," Colton said, his voice quiet but firm. Eli tossed the knife into the dirt. "Nobody helped me. The lock was open when I woke up. Your badge was on the bed. I thought maybe you were setting me free, or setting me up." Colton sighed, his shoulders heavy with a weight he couldn't shake. "I didn't open that cell, Eli, and I didn't ring that bell." "Then who did?" the boy asked, his eyes searching Colton's. Before Colton could even think of an answer, a rifle shot cracked through the air. The bullet slammed into the dirt right between them. Both men dove for cover behind a water trough. Another shot echoed from the ridge above. Eli's voice trembled. "Who's shooting, Sheriff?" Colton risked a peek over the edge. On the ridge he saw a rider, cloaked in black, his rifle glinting in the sun. He fired again, and this time the bullet tore right through Colton's hat, missing his head by inches. "Mount up," Colton barked. They scrambled onto their horses, racing through the canyon as dust and splinters exploded around them. Bullets whistled past their ears like angry bees. When they finally reached the river bend, they ducked behind a fallen log, gasping for breath. Eli's hands shook as he tried to reload his own pistol. "You think that's the same man who rang the bell?" Colton nodded grimly. "Ain't no coincidence. Whoever he is, he wants blood, either yours or mine." As the sun dipped low, painting the desert in shades of orange and red, they made camp in a rocky hollow. Colton carefully cleaned a cut on Eli's arm, a wound from a flying splinter during their escape. "You ever wonder why that bell rings?" Colton asked quietly, breaking the silence. Eli just glanced at the dancing flames of their fire. "Folks say it's cursed, that every time it tolls, justice comes collectin' a debt." The sheriff stared into the fire, his voice low and full of regret. "Your father's death. It wasn't clean, son. I believed a lie. I thought I was keeping the peace, but all I did was feed my own pride. When that bell rang the first time, I thought it was God reminding me of what I'd done." Eli said nothing for a long, long time. The fire popped and hissed between them. Finally, he whispered, "Then maybe it's ringing for you now." Colton looked up, the firelight catching the pain in his eyes. "Maybe it is." Back in Dust River, Mara sat alone in the saloon, staring out the window as the wind howled through the empty streets. The piano sat silent. Then she heard it again, faint, distant, like a whisper carried on the storm. Gong. Her glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. No, not again. She ran outside, her shawl whipping in the fierce wind. The church bell was ringing, but the rope was hanging completely still. No one was there. And as the echoes faded into the hills, Mara saw something else. A trail of riders heading toward the canyon. She recognized the man in front by the menacing gleam of his rifle. Jonas Red. A bounty hunter. A ghost from Colton's past. He was the one man who had sworn to kill every soul tied to the Mercer hanging, and that included the sheriff. Out in the canyon, Colton stirred at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. He rose to his feet, his hand on his gun. Eli looked up from the fire. "You hear that?" Colton nodded. "They're comin'." The wind carried the faint echo of the bell one last time, rolling across the vast desert. The sheriff drew his revolver, his jaw tightening. "Stay behind me, son." The moon rose over Dust River, pale, cold, and waiting. And when the first shot finally fired, the sound of justice began its final, deadly march. What do you think will happen next? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the Dusty Trails. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Sound of a cold wind blowing through a canyon, a distant, lonely bell tolls once. The canyon air was cold and sharp, the kind that bit through bone and memory alike. I crouched behind a jagged boulder, revolver drawn tight in my hand. The boy, Eli Mercer, knelt beside me, eyes wide but steady. Across the valley floor, shadows moved. 6 riders under the moonlight led by a man in a black duster. Jonas Red. Even from a distance, I knew him. That cruel tilt of the hat, the scar down his cheek, same as the day I ran him out of Dust River for murder. Only this time, Jonas had come back to settle the kind of debt that couldn't be paid in gold. Eli looked at me. "That him?" I nodded. "Yeah, Red's a man who don't forgive and don't forget. Guess tonight neither do I." The boy swallowed hard. "We can ride. Make it to the ridge 'fore they spot us." I holstered my gun. "I've been riding from my sins for 13 years, son. Time I faced 'em head on." The riders fanned out across the valley, their torches blazing in the dark like angry eyes. Jonas Red dismounted, his boots crunching on the sand. "Sheriff Hayes," his voice echoed, low and venomous. "You thought you could bury what you did, but every ghost you hung still screams your name." I stepped out from behind the rock, my coat flapping in the cold wind. "I ain't sheriff no more." Red let out a laugh, a sound with no humor in it. "Oh, you'll die one, just the same." He motioned to his men. Bring the boy. He's the Mercer blood, ain't he? I raised my voice, letting it carry across the canyon. The boy's innocent. You want a reckoning, you take it with me. Red smirked, his teeth flashing in the moonlight. Oh, I intend to. We faced each other beneath the ghostly echo of that distant bell, a cursed sound rolling through the canyon like thunder before the storm. My revolver hung at my side, but my voice stayed calm. You know, Red, I spent half my life wearing a badge thinking I was cleaning up this land. Truth is, I just made more graves. Maybe that bell's been tolling for me since the start. Red sneered. Then hear it now, Sheriff. Hear your end ring. He drew first. The night exploded in a flash of gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit the rocks like lightning. Eli dropped to the ground, covering his head as the world turned to noise and fire. I fired back, taking one of Red's men clean off his horse. Another fell screaming into the dust. The boy, Eli, scrambled for a fallen rifle beside him, firing wild, the shot kicking up dirt near Red's feet. But Red was fast, too fast. His bullet tore through my shoulder, spinning me back against the rock. Blood soaked my sleeve, a hot, searing pain, but I stayed on my feet. You should have stayed in your grave, Red, I shouted, firing again. The outlaw ducked, firing back, and the bullet grazed Eli's arm. Then, silence. Both our guns were empty. Both of us breathing hard, the night holding its breath between us. Red drew a long, wicked-looking knife, stepping closer, his boots crunching slow on the gravel. I staggered to meet him, one arm hanging limp, the other gripping my revolver by the barrel, ready to use it as a club. You took a good man once, Red hissed, his voice full of hate. Jacob Mercer. He begged you to listen. You didn't. My own voice came out ragged. And I'll carry that till the day I die. Red raised the knife, its edge gleaming. Then today's that day. But before the blade could fall, a shot cracked through the night. Sharp, clean. Red froze, his eyes wide with surprise. The knife slipped from his hand. He stumbled, dropped to his knees, and then fell face first into the dirt. Behind him stood Eli, the rifle smoking in his grip, tears running down his face. I ain't letting another man die for what my father didn't do, the boy whispered, his voice trembling but strong. I just stared at him, the same eyes, same heart as his father, Jacob Mercer. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Only the wind moved, carrying the scent of gunpowder and sage across the silent canyon. By dawn, it was over. The surviving riders had fled back into the desert, leaving only silence behind. I sat by a small fire, my arm bandaged, my hat resting beside me. Eli sat across from me, staring at the horizon as it turned from gray to gold. What happens now? He asked softly. I looked toward the rising sun. You head east, son. Start fresh. Don't let this land turn you bitter. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. And you? I managed a weak smile. I reckon I'll ride back to town, hand in what's left of the law. Eli frowned. You could come with me. I shook my head. Dust River's got ghosts that only answer to me. I stood, wincing, and placed my old sheriff's badge into the boy's hand. Your father was an honest man. Let that mean something again. Eli looked down at the badge, tarnished, but shining faintly in the new light. You sure? I nodded. Justice ain't about hanging men, son. It's about facing the truth, even when it breaks you. When I rode back into Dust River, the streets were empty. The bell tower stood silent at last. I tied up my horse outside the church and walked inside. Dust floated in the golden light streaming through the windows. At the altar, I knelt, not to pray for forgiveness, but to thank the Lord I'd finally stopped running. Behind me, the door creaked open. It was Mara Finch, her eyes full of unshed tears. He's gone, she asked. I nodded. Rode east. He's got a better life waiting. She smiled softly, a look of pure relief. And you? I looked up at the bell rope, still swaying gently in the breeze. Me? I'll stay. Maybe mend what's left of this place." We stood there in silence, side by side, as the sun climbed higher over Dust River. Then, for the first time in 13 years, the bell rang. Slow, gentle, not in anger, but in peace. Gong. Mara's hand found mine. "Reckon it's over," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "No, Mara. It's just beginnin'." As the sound of the bell drifted across the desert, a lone rider crested a distant ridge, a boy with a tarnished badge shining on his chest. He looked back once toward Dust River, then rode on into the sunrise. The land was quiet again, and for the first time in a long, long while, justice sounded like mercy. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story of redemption in the Old West, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the frontier. We'd love to have you in our community. Until next time, stay safe and keep riding towards your own sunrise.